Hello dear students, welcome back. Today we are meeting to start up a new chapter from your book Snapshot, and we are starting lesson number 2 titled as The Address, written by Margot Minko. And the story The Address has the background of the Holland War during the World War II, and it was in 1940 that the Germans invaded Holland and occupied it after a fierce fighting. The German move was sudden and unexpected, and Holland was forced to surrender. So the Dutch Jews were mercilessly persecuted, and between 1940 and 1941, the Jews were removed from public life, and their properties were sold to the non-Jews. Now, Margot Minko was also belonged to a Jewish family, and while her parents, brothers, and sisters got arrested, she was lucky to escape, and she remained in hiding during the World War II. So, large numbers of Jews never returned, and unemployed Jews men were deported and sent to the Nazi camps, concentration camps, and life for Dutch people was becoming harder. So families of Jews left for places of safety, and by the middle of 1944 everything was in short supply. The public services broke down, there was no transport, no electricity, and no telephone service, and widespread diseases caused large scale deaths. So this short story, The Address, is the poignant account of a daughter, that is the narrator Margot Minko, who goes in search of her mother's belongings after the war in Holland. So it is written against the background of the German invasion of Holland. It deals with a fundamental human dilemma, whether to cling to the memories of the past or forget it and reconcile with the present. Now, the narrator, a young woman displaced as a result of the war, goes in search of her mother's belongings lent to one lady whose name is Mrs. Darling. And when she comes across the familiar objects in unfamiliar surroundings, she loses interest in all those things, and she leaves them behind in a resolve to forget them completely, to reconcile with her life as it is. So the story also conveys the idea that war affects human lives terribly. The dislocation or dislocated refugees rarely comes back to the homes, and if any of them does come back, he finds himself a stranger in the familiar surroundings and has to go back. So war affects them completely and permanently. And this is what happens to the narrator. She is a rootless person now, and she has lost her old home and her mother belongings. Now she lives in a small rented room in an unfamiliar city. So this is all about the story, a nutshell of the story. Let's discuss the chapter in detail. So students, here is the story, and I shall be reading and then explaining it. Do you still know me? I asked. I stands for the narrator, Margot Minko. The woman looked at me searchingly. She had opened the door a chink. A chink means a narrow opening. So she had opened the door in a very, very slight way. I came closer and stood on the step. No, I don't know you. I am Mrs. S.'s daughter. So narrator introduced herself to that lady who was standing at the door, and she introduced herself that I am Mrs. S.'s daughter. She held her hand on the door as though she wanted to prevent it opening any further. Her face gave absolutely no sign of recognition. She kept staring at me in silence. Perhaps I was mistaken. I thought, perhaps it isn't her. I had seen her only once, fleetingly, and that was years ago. It was almost probable that I had rung the wrong bell. The woman let go of the door and stepped to the side. She was wearing my mother's green knitted cardigan. The wooden buttons were rather pale from washing. She saw that I was looking at the cardigan and half hid herself again behind the door. But I knew now that I was right. So the narrator asked the woman standing at the door if she still knew her, and the lady had opened the door a little. The narrator came closer to the door and stood there, and the woman responded negatively, and the narrator still gave her introduction that she said that she was Mrs. S.'s daughter, and the woman had held the door tightly as she didn't want her to enter the house, and she kept staring at the narrator, though she couldn't recognize her. Now, at one point of time, the narrator thought that maybe she had come to the wrong house. She had seen the woman only for a short time years ago, as she is writing fleetingly. Fleetingly, it means for a very short time, and that is 2 years ago. No? So the woman who answered the door stepped aside and let go of the door. So the narrator recognized her mother's green knitted cardigan that the woman was wearing, and the wooden buttons had become pale because of the washing. And the woman noticed the narrator looking at the cardigan. She hid behind the door, and now the narrator knew that she had come to the right house. Earlier, she was doubting herself that might be she had come on a wrong address, but when she looked at her mother's cardigan that the woman was wearing, she came, convinced that no, I am at the right house. Now she further says, "Well, you knew my mother," I asked. "Have you come back?" said the woman. I thought that no one had come back. "Only me," the narrator said, "only me." A door opened and closed in the passage behind her. A musty smell emerged. Musty means a stale or unpleasant, you may say. "I regret I cannot do anything for you," the lady said. "I've come here specially on the train. I wanted to talk to you for a moment." "It is not convenient for me now," said the woman. "I can't see you. Another time." So she told the narrator that we shall meet another time, not today. She nodded and cautiously closed the door as though no one inside the house should be disturbed. I stood where I was on the step. The curtain in front of the bay window moved. Someone stared at me and would then have asked what I wanted. "Oh, nothing," the woman would have said. It was nothing. So the narrator asked the woman about her mother, and the woman asked her if she had come back. She replied that only to her and no one else came with her. The woman opened the door and a passage was behind her, and a stale smell occurred all over. The woman told her that she could not do anything for her. The narrator told her that she had come from far place on the train just to talk to her. Even then, the woman told her that it is not convenient to talk right now and asked her to come back later. The woman closed the door as she didn't want anyone to get disturbed in the house, and the narrator was still standing on the step. She saw a curtain moving on the window bay. Someone was staring at her from inside the house, and she thought it was nothing as the woman have told her. Then the narrator says, "I looked at the nameplate again. Darling," it said, in black letters on white enamel. And on the jamb, a bit higher, the number 46. Now, enamel here stands for an opaque or semi-transparent substance that is a type of a glass, you may say. Okay, and jamb is side post of a window, or you may say fireplace or doorway. Okay, so as I walked slowly back to the station, I thought about my mother, who had given me the address years ago. It had been in the first half of the war, and I was home for a few days, and it struck me immediately that something or other about the rooms had changed. I missed various things my mother was surprised I should have noticed so quickly. Then she told me about Mrs. Dolling. I had never heard of her, but apparently she was an old acquaintance of my mother. Acquaintance means stranger or social contact, you may say, whom she hadn't seen for years, and she had suddenly turned up and renewed their contact. Since then, she had come regularly. So here, the narrator looked at the number plate again, and it said number 46. Okay. Dolling was written on the plate on white enamel. And as she was going back to the station, she was thinking about her mother, who gave her the address, and it was the first half of the war, and she was home for a few days, and suddenly it struck her that the room was different now and various things were missing. So she had asked her mother, and her mother was surprised that she noticed the changes a little later. And it was that time when she told her about this woman, Mrs. Dolling, and she was an old contact of hers whom she hadn't seen for years, but suddenly she came to visit her, and since then they had been in regular contact. Now she further says, every time she leaves here, she takes something home with her, said my mother. She took all the table silver in one go, and then the antique plates that hung there. She had trouble lugging those large vases. Lugging means carry a heavy object with great effort. Okay. And I'm worried she got a crick in her back from the crockery. Crick stands for cramp or spasm in muscles, you may say. So my mother shook her head pityingly. Pityingly means she was feeling sorry for her, that she is carrying so much of luggage, heavy luggage. I would never have dared ask her. She suggested it to me herself. She even insisted, and she wanted to save all my nice things. And if we have to leave here, we shall lose everything, she says. Have you agreed with her that she should keep everything? I asked. As if that's necessary, my mother cried. It would simply be an insult to talk like that. And think about the risk she's running each time she goes out of our door with a full suitcase or bag. So her mother told her that whenever that woman came to visit her, she took something from the house with her. Table silvers, antique plates, and she had trouble over carrying the large vases. And she told her that the cramp in her back came from the crockery, and her mother shook her head in sorrow. The woman kept telling the narrator's mother that she wanted to save her precious things, and if they had to leave the place someday, they would lose everything. Now the narrator asked her mother if she really wanted her to take all the things with her. Her mother replied that even if she didn't, it would be an insult to ask her not to. And she was going out with the risk herself, and a suitcase full of items. So she is carrying all these heavy luggage for them, for their sakes, for their to save their nice and precious things and precious articles. So much of labor she was taking, so it would be an insult if I would ask this thing to her. So children, we are leaving our discussion for today here, and in the next video, in the next part, we shall resume the chapter. Till then, goodbye.